Why do people do what they do? There are innumerable reasons, but there's also categories that I believe these categories sort of contain a description of why people do what they do. So imagine as an acronym the word action, A-C-T-I-O-N, vertically, and then horizontally coming off of the A, the word agency. What is agency? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not the ability to choose to do whatever you want to do, because sometimes one is limited in what can in what one can do. So that's not agency. Agency is the ability to choose one's way of being, regardless of the circumstances. I can choose to be kind, even if somebody's being mean, for example. I can choose to be mean, even if somebody's being kind. I can choose to have resilience in the face of adversity. I can choose to justify myself in the face of adversity. So I can choose my way of being. Agency also, in a more broad way of saying it, of describing it, is I can choose my behavior that is within my ability. Most people can't say, I want to go to space today, and then now that's within their ability to do. So we're all limited in certain behaviors. But of those that are within our limits, we can choose to do a lot of things. And almost all of those things that we choose to do have to do with our way of being. So agency. And then the word below that, the C, imagine the words culture/community. So I might be influenced in terms of my behavior in the world based on the culture that I grow up in. Now, the first thing that might come to mind is Western culture and Eastern culture, or the culture of a particular country or ethnic group as opposed to another country/ethnic group. And that's true, by the way. I might have a certain proclivity to become a meat eater if I grow up in a particular community or culture, or I might have the proclivity to grow up being a vegetarian if I grow up in a different culture/community. But I'm also talking about pick any neighborhood in any country, especially countries that have varied melting pot type cultures within it, like the United States, for example. Pick any neighborhood, and one of the houses in that neighborhood, the culture of it could be diametrically opposed or different than the house right next to it. And by the way, even if the two houses are both from a similar, what one might call the culture, these kids, if there's kids in these houses, are being raised differently. The people that are the parents or the guardians of that house, if there's more than one, each one of them came from different cultures, and the mixture of their two cultures together is what's informing these young people that might be growing up in that home, for example. So you can't ever underestimate the power of the difference between the culture of one spot, like a home, and one really close to it, because everybody grows up in very different ways and runs into very different things. And then if they have children, now those children are being brought up by the influence that their guardians have had in their life. So culture/community will influence why I do what I do. So what do we have so far? We have agency, my ability to choose my way of being, has an influence on why I do what I do, why I behave in certain ways, the community/culture that I come from. And then in the vertical word action, AC, now we're going to go to T, trauma. A lot of people go through a lot of stuff, and you can classify a lot of that as trauma. Something that is impactful enough that it rearranges how I perceive the world and how I react to the world. That's trauma. It doesn't have to be a super big one. Being late for school as a fourth grader and coming in and half the class laughing at you because the teacher said, "Don't be late, go sit down," and they're giggling at you. That could be a traumatic event. You being in a car wreck and both of your parents die as a result of it, and you're all beat up. That is also a traumatic event. Obviously, those two things would have different levels of influence in terms of affecting the person who went through said trauma. Almost everybody knows. I'm sure it's a very well-known thing. Soldiers come back from war. They're typically pretty different people, and they need to go through a lot of helping, whether it be therapy or that kind of thing, a lot of being helped in order to process the traumas that they've gone through. I worked for a long time in the treatment program arena, and I don't know if there was ever a client that walked through the doors that hadn't experienced some kind of trauma, and most of the time it was significant trauma. And if you go through a hard enough experience, it will absolutely influence why you do what you do. Anywhere from being afraid of loud noises and then wanting to go be by yourself to being sort of in a very snappy way angry. It kind of came out of nowhere, and then you mouth off or you yell at somebody, and you were never like that before, the trauma, for example. So that's a third influencer of why people do what they do, trauma. The other one, ACTI, so I is the word individuality. You think of that's the horizontal word coming off the vertical word action, individuality. Any parent out there, whether you're the natural parents of a child or whether you've adopted somebody pretty young or whatever, you know that from birth, children are different. I have 6 children myself, and they, from the very first few days, you could tell that they have a different little thing going on in there inside of themselves than the sibling before them. Or in the case of twins, which we had, the 2 little babies are different in terms of their personality. And within weeks, it's pretty obvious. Within a couple months, it's completely obvious. And within maybe a year or two, it is profoundly obvious that whatever your belief system is, individuals come into this world as individuals. So that affects why a person does what they do. From the cosmos, mixer machine, to this person who, before it would seem they had the ability to be influenced by anything, they are already got their own thing going on. So how one simply came into this world could influence why people do what they do, why I do what I do, why y'all do what you do. And then the last one, it's actually the last 2 letters, on. So think of the concept of on or off. So epigenetics, it's sort of a new field. Basically, epigenetics is the study of genetics over generations. Genetics broader than just the genetics of one person, for example. It's the study of how genetics works, how that subject creates the interactions between previous generations and following generations. So, for example, it's a pretty well-known study at this point, but some scientists got some, I can't remember if it's mice or rats, but anyway, They hooked them up to electrodes so that they could see what their little brains were doing, and they shocked them and interjected a scent at the same time. We'll say it was lavender, and until they associated the shock with the scent, and then they stopped shocking and they just interjected scent into their little cages or whatever, and their brains would have the same effect as if being shocked. So now they relate lavender with being shocked, and they have the markers, if you will, of a trauma response to lavender. So okay, great. That's good. Now we're going to breed these little mice. They bred the little mice, and then they put the parents away so they don't have any interactions with the offspring. And all these little offspring are hanging out, and they would insert lavender into their cages. And a certain percentage of them would have a trauma response, would have a reaction to lavender. Well, I thought that was interesting. They bred the second generation, and then again, put them away so they don't have any direct influence over their offspring. So you got the third generation. Lavender gets introduced into their cages, and more of the, in terms of percentage, more of a percentage of the third generation reacted than the second one did. So they didn't even know their grandparents, but they had a trauma response to a thing that their grandparents had a trauma response to. So some things are passed down genetically. Certain genes are turned on or upregulated, and some genes are turned off or downregulated. They're also finding that an individual can influence the upregulation and downregulation of their own genes. Sometimes it can happen very quickly, and sometimes it takes a little bit of work to work through and, in effect, decide to be a different kind of person in certain ways, and it will upregulate genes according to the ways that you're wanting to change your life. So action, so think of the word action vertically and then across. Agency for A, for C, culture community, for T, trauma, for I, individuality, for on, epigenetics, upregulating, downregulating genes. So I, as an individual, do what I do because of the culture / community that I came from any trauma that I may have had, how I came into this world, and genes that were passed down to me. I didn't mention, by the way, the A, how I exercise my agency. And the reason why I didn't mention that, I mentioned those other four, because I wanted to get to the A. I started out with the A, and now I'm going to end with the A. Because the A is underappreciated and underutilized and not comprehended all that well. Sometimes I don't think I can comprehend it all that well. We have the ability as a human being to overcome genetic dispositions, our little individual oddities, those need to be overcome, trauma, anything that might be negative or damaging about a culture or community that we may have grown up in. Agency trumps them all. Is it difficult to exercise agency, notwithstanding our culture, community, trauma, individuality, and genetics that might be involved? Absolutely. Have people done it? Absolutely. So when a person exercises their agency, let's say to do something in service of somebody else, an act of kindness towards somebody else, sometimes they have to have overcome perhaps something ingrained in them from childhood in their community and their culture. Maybe they had to drum up courage, which was difficult for them because of traumatic things that happened in their life. Maybe they're a super shy person and oh my gosh, it's not my personality to be helpful to this person in this particular way, and that's kind of rough. Or maybe they're the 11th generation of the sort of people that just don't interact much with other people. It takes it takes intention. And some people, although it doesn't look like it, because maybe it looks like they're struggling in their life, maybe there's addiction in their life, maybe they're not the most successful person or an achiever. It might sort of look like they haven't really been exercising their agency positively too much at all. They might be exercising their agency more powerfully than somebody who does look more successful, who does look more like they got their act together. Because this person has had so much trauma or sort of negative influence in their culture or a genetic thing or whatever that they've had to deal with, that it could be debilitating, and they are making it anyway. The examples are replete. And what I sort of hope to demonstrate in this podcast is that we just don't know. We don't know what... We may know the appearance of how somebody seems to be exercising their agency, but we don't know the rest of it. We don't know anything about we may think we know a lot about their culture or community or their trauma or their individuality or their genetic inheritance. So now a little bit about oneself, yourself. You may not know about your genetic inheritance. You may not have memory about trauma that may have happened to you when you were little, pre-verbal. And so there's weird little artifacts of behavior that you don't understand. And you know that other people older than you know what may have happened to you. So in my case, there's artifacts of behavior and tendencies and reactivities that I don't understand that I've had to work with. So if you feel like your behavior is not all that great, well, take two messages. One, be kinder to yourself than maybe you have been thus far. You're probably better than you think you are. You've probably worked harder than you think you have. The second message is keep going. It is not easy to become a better person. And it's your own barometer of what that means anyway. The minute we try to identify whether or not somebody else is becoming a better person is the day we assume that we know everything about their culture, community, and trauma, and individuality, and epigenetics, and all the rest. Like we're some sort of genius and can comprehend that in that person by looking at them and observing their behavior a little bit. It's difficult for us ourselves to understand that. But what always can come to the fore, can come to the front, is I can choose today. Thanks.